The following podcast is sponsored by Structure Tech.
Personally, I'm not skeptical of radon, but I think there are some older people who might be a little bit skeptical. So we're going to peel back the onion here and learn a lot about radon. Welcome, everyone. You're listening to Structure Talk, a Structure Tech presentation. My name is Bill Ulrich, alongside Tessa Murray and Reuben Saltzman. As always, your three-legged stool coming to you from the Northland, talking all things houses and anything else that pops into our mind on a given day. We've been away for a couple weeks. Reuben, you held down the fort last week, but now the whole team is back in place, and we're very excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking with Josh Kerber, who is with the state of Minnesota, the Department of Health technically. He's a technical radon lead with the Minnesota Department of Health, and he's a research scientist, and Josh knows everything there is to know about radon. So we're going to put him on the spot, and we're going to ask him 67,000 questions about radon. So I'm really excited because it's this one topic that I think, personally, I'm not skeptical of radon, but I think there are some older people who might be a little bit skeptical. So we're going to peel back the onion here and learn a lot about radon. But before we get to Josh, we got to circle back to the end of our last episode where we put a call to action out to our audience to ask them what they thought we should do moving forward with the podcast. Should we look to be just speaking to home inspectors, or should we continue talking to people who own houses, who sell houses, who inspect houses? And for the explanation of all the responses, I'm going to turn to you, Reuben. Please tell us what the audience is suggesting we do.
Sure. Yeah. As soon as we made that request, we got a flood of emails. And, my assumption was that it's just about all home inspectors listening to this podcast. But as it turns out, they're just the vocal group. There's actually a lot of homeowners who listen to this podcast. I said, if you listen and you're a homeowner, just drop me a line. And I got a lot of lines. There are a ton of homeowners who listen to this. So I just want to take a quick second and thank a few people for writing in. I want to thank Kathy, John, Robert, Jody, Scott, Andrew, Scott, John, Michelle, Joel, Nathan, Emily, Ann, Bryn, and Andrew, and Damon, and Paul. Thank you all for sharing your 2 cents with us. I read all of your emails and I really appreciate you taking the time. So you are heard, and we will not be changing the format of this podcast. We may occasionally dig into some topics that are more home inspector focused, and we'll be announcing those at the beginning of the show. We'll kind of say, hey, look, today's show is more focused for home inspectors. We're going to be talking about this topic. And, people want to tune out for that week. Cool. And, home inspectors' ears may perk up a little bit more for those, but we're not going to be significantly changing the format of this show. So I'll just throw that out there right away.
That sound you just heard was me wiping my brow, because I was sweating a little bit about having to get super technical about things. Probably not the place I belong.
I wish people could see your face right now, Bill. Relief.
Yes, relief. Well, with that said, I'm excited to be moving forward with this conversation about radon. So Josh, can you take a second and introduce yourself to everybody and correct any mistakes I made in my introduction, but kind of tell us who you are and how you got in the position you're in and what you do on a daily basis.
All right. Well, thanks for the invite, you guys. I've been watching and listening as a fan and reading blogs for a long time. My name's Joshua Kerber. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm a research scientist, do a lot of applied research with building construction, specifically with indoor air and even more specifically, radon gas. Cut my teeth doing radon related work in 2000. So I've been at this for 21 years. You wouldn't guess it looking by my baby face, I guess, but I got a degree in atmospheric science. And then prior to that, I was in the home construction business. My father's a ceramic tile and stone installer. So worked alongside a lot of different trades throughout the years. Got a job with the health department in 2002 to run general education and outreach regarding radon to the general population of Minnesota. It's where we're out pounding the pavement, saying, test your home. Radon causes lung cancer and all the other warnings that you're probably likely aware of. In doing so too, I got mentored by some of the best building scientists around and learned a lot about radon mitigation. And now I'm a lead of sorts in the state and in our region and in the country as far as helping increase technical capacity, both from state and tribal radon programs, as well as contractors. Co-trainers with Kansas State University, where we help train really advanced techniques for proper system sizing, which is important. And hopefully we will get into some of that too. So I really like the technical aspects of my job where you can go look at a house with a contractor who's having trouble, suggest some recommendations, point out why it's not working or why it's probably working too well, and maybe dial some of this power, this suction or airflow back. And every time we do that, we come up with like a case study or something to share with the rest of the world so everyone else can learn what we learned. Hopefully, these difficult to fix houses become something of the past where radon mitigators just really kind of know how to handle all these different situations. But as you guys are aware, every house you walk into is a different situation.
So where do you share these case studies? Do you do a blog or a YouTube channel, or do you teach this stuff in person? How does that get distributed?
Well, prior to COVID, we would host in-person trainings for our radon partners, we'll call them, whether they were our licensees, our local nonprofit folks, where I would just present case studies and the information. Other places, since COVID, we've been doing a lot of free webinars through our office, broadcasting live from the South Metro in the bunker. And then also at national and regional radon training conferences. We do a lot of that stuff there as well.
Okay. So Josh, let me ask you, do you do any other business besides this? Do you have a side business where you do any radon mitigation or testing or any of that? Or is it exclusively for the state?
Exclusively for the state, with the exception of I'm a consultant trainer for Viz Advanced Techniques with Kansas State. But other than that, no, this is really just what I do for the state.
Okay.
Hey, I've got a quick question before we dive into the really technical stuff. Josh, can you say why people should be concerned about radon and what it is for people that are listening and may not really be familiar with it at all?
Absolutely. I get so wrapped up in like just assuming everyone knows what this all is, right? Radon is a natural occurring radioactive gas that's found in virtually any soil in the upper Midwest and through a lot of soils throughout the country. It's a leading cause of lung cancer for non-smokers. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer overall. The latest EPA risk estimate puts about 21,000 premature lung cancer deaths each year in the United States.
Wow.
So it's bad stuff. We can't see it. We can't taste it. We can't smell it. The only way to know if you have it in your house is to test. And so that's why we suggest every house gets tested. Every house is a little different, operated a little differently. So that's why we should test. More information at mn.gov/radon. That's a redirect to our radon webpage, and there's probably too much information on that one.
And why would it be you said upper Midwest and then some other southern states. Why upper Midwest?
We can blame Canada.
That's too bad. I like Canada a lot.
Canada also has a pretty high radon levels too. So during the ice ages, the Canadian bedrock was really, when the earth was formed, it's got, for whatever reason, a lot of uranium and radium in it. And as the glaciers came and scoured and pushed that dirt, they left it here for us. So we have radon in almost every soil type, wherever you look. We assume that radon is basically everywhere in the dirt. It's a matter of how much. So as the glaciers receded, the dirt is left behind. We now build boxes and live in these boxes and work in these boxes. And those boxes, even though we think that they're well ventilated, and they are in many cases, they run negative or they suck on the soil. And so that's how radon gets in. We can get into that a little bit more too.
I got a question. While you're bringing up Canada, it makes me think of something I've heard. I've never actually done my own research on this, but I heard a rumor that the action level, the level at which we say, hey, this is too much radon, and you're really encouraged to do something to fix it. I've heard that the action level is way higher in Canada. Like they're way more cool with having a bunch of radon in their houses. Is that true?
Sort of.
Okay.
The Canadian reference level is higher than the United States action level. The U.S. action level is 4 picocuries per liter. And understand that action level is not health-based. It's technology-based line in the sand that EPA drew in the 1980s based on technology of building science at the time. So that's kind of where the industry, quote unquote, safe level is. There's no safe level of radon at all. In fact, many of the lung cancers attributed to radon occur in homes that are less than 4. So we want to get it as low as we reasonably can. Now, up until the early 2000s, Canada's reference level was somewhere around 30 picocuries for residences. They have since lowered that. And I'd actually have to go back and get the exact number. I want to say it's somewhere around 8 picocuries, but don't hold my feet to the fire on that. But they have lowered it. It's not as low as ours. In addition, World Health Organization has come out with a standard reference level of 2.7. It's a conversion from what they use as becquerels per cubic meter. They said, let's set it at 100. And so the international community outside of the United States is like, okay, yeah, that calculates down to 2.7. So you're going to see three numbers in writing. You're going to see the 4 that the EPA set, the 2.7 from the World Health Organization, and then EPA also, when they set the level of 4, they said, consider lowering your radon if it's over 2. So it's like a consideration, a pretty hard recommendation for 4, and then 2.7 is, again, the world reference, standard reference level.
Got it. That's helpful.
Josh, I have a question, because in Minnesota, we have gone through a licensing event in our state. So can you talk a little bit about why licensing was brought up here, some of the things that happen, who is actually under the purview of this licensing doctrine, or however you want to call it? Just give us some background on licensing.
All right. Try not to take the whole rest of the podcast to do that. It all started with back in 2012 or 2013. We offered up a legislative solution to get more radon education out. And what the governor and the health department proposed was what was called the Radon Awareness Act. And in short, what that required is during a home sale, the seller is required to disclose anything that they know about radon on the property. Have they tested? Do you have the documentation if you have done so? Have you taken any steps to reduce it? And do you have that documentation? And then finally, 2 other things. There's a radon warning statement. It's a 2-paragraph statement that's required language in the disclosure statements that says basically radon causes lung cancer. It can be tested for and fixed. You're now made aware that radon might be a problem in this property you're about to buy. What you do with that information is up to the buyer. Do they want to test for it? Do they want to negotiate it? That's all up to them. Optional kind of thing. You're not required to test or mitigate. Well, when that was promulgated, January 1st of 2014, we overnight saw a 4-fold increase in the amount of mitigations being installed. So a big increase in radon awareness, and really mostly driven by real estate. And the industry really is driven by real estate to varying degrees. Well, with the additional mitigations, estimated 8-fold increase in the amount of radon tests being done. Some of those tests weren't being done properly. Some of the mitigation systems weren't being installed properly. So then in comes the complaints. So a couple of years later, the legislature says, well, we have to nip this in the bud too. And so they proposed regulations on the radon professionals in the state. And that went through a couple of different iterations over a few years. There was an injunction. It's all been adjudicated. So now that the dust is clear, if you're doing a radon test in a building you don't own or lease, you have to have a licensed radon department. If you're going to do mitigation in a building that you don't own or lease, you're required to have a licensed radon department. Laboratories that analyze radon test kits, there's not many of them, but they're required to have a licensed radon department. And then companies with multiple licensees for mitigation are also required to have a licensed radon department. The other addition to that is that each mitigation system installed in Minnesota is required to have radon mitigation system tag. It's a unique 4-inch by 6-inch tag that's affixed to the systems when the systems are completed and finalized. Let's just say, or commissioned, maybe in your guys' word.
I want to press you for some details on one of these items. You said, like, if you're a homeowner, making sure I'm getting this right. Let's say I'm a homeowner and I want to install a radon mitigation system at my own house. I still need to pull a permit for that, right?
No, actually. So if it's in your own home, you're free to do the work. Similar to plumbing, electrical. Now, electrical is going to require you to get a permit and an inspection. You guys would know more about the plumbing aspect of stuff. Common sense tell me it should still be inspected, but they don't have to have a license to do the work if it's in your own home. Similar to for this particular regulation. If you're doing it in your own home, the regulations don't apply.
So that's really interesting, because the way all of the rest of the building codes are written is that if you're doing permitted work, it doesn't matter who's doing it, whether you're licensed or not. Permitted work requires a permit, period. And if you're the homeowner, you get special status where you don't have to have a license to pull that permit. And you can do it on your own single family home that you own and occupy. But you're saying with radon, not only do you not need to be licensed to do the work, but you don't even need to pull a tag if it's your own house. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not saying that that would be the best way to write the regulation or the statute. The legislature wrote the statute.
But
we're left with applying it to professionals and to the state for that matter.
Okay. That's a very interesting point. All right. Now, let me propose something crazy. Josh, what if there was a company out there who promoted and installed sub-slab dehumidification systems? This is not radon mitigation. This is just something that looks and talks and smells just like a radon system. It's a pipe that goes underneath your basement slab.
Yep.
But instead of having that pipe go up through the roof, they just want to go out the rim joist. They want to go out the side of the house. And it's not there, remember, to mitigate radon. It's just there to remove moisture from underneath your home to kind of dry out your basement.
Or whatever else might be under the floor, right?
Yeah. And if some radon gas were to, be mitigated, so be it. How would you guys treat that?
Well, if it's unscrupulous, you're going to get found out. There's a lot of self-policing that we're hearing too. So people calling and saying, well, first of all, I'm not going to say that this is a big problem that we see. We've heard of the hypothetical and what would we do? So in short, how would we handle that? What is that system there for? Was there a radon test conducted prior to that thing being installed? If the answer is yes, then that is a radon system. If the answer is no, then really, why is it there? If it's not there for radon, can we really regulate it? Would we really regulate it? It's kind of a gray area that hasn't come up yet. Now, we have had companies that would advertise exactly what you said, and eventually they contact us, asking questions like, am I allowed to do this or not? And just really kind of just chat with them. It's like, do you want to get into the radon world? And if the answer is yes, then you need to get licensed. And we've had at least one of them come by and say, yeah, I think licensing is probably the prudent thing for me to do.
Okay. All right.
I've got a more general question, Josh. Just curious, and this is Minnesota specific. Do you know what the average number of existing homes that have radon levels above 4 picocuries per liter is versus new construction homes here?
That is a good question. We've done some research on that. This isn't a case control study by any means, but generally speaking, this is what we know. Of all the data that we've gathered in the last, say, 10, 15 years on radon in Minnesota homes, 45% of Minnesota homes will have a radon level over 4. So flip a coin, right? 50-50-ish. And that can vary, but kind of depending upon where in the state you're located. Generally speaking, the southern half and the western half are higher percentage-wise than, say, the Arrowhead. But that doesn't mean that every house you test in Duluth is going to be low. Nor does it mean every house in Mankato you test is going to be high. So 45% existing housing stock. When we look more closely at as-built homes, and this is a study from, I think we finally published it in 2015. We looked at houses built from 2010 to 2012, after the new Minnesota Building Code required passive radon features in homes. What we saw was we tested nearly 1,000 of those homes in 13 different counties, and we saw only 20% of newly constructed homes had a radon problem. 20%. 5 to 22. It's not exactly apples to apples, right? They're not exact same comparisons, but we're comparing one data set to another, saying it appears that what we're doing in code is making a difference. So now we only have to activate 1/5 of these houses as opposed to fixing almost half of them. So we're actually, from a public health standpoint, moving ahead of the curve as far as prevention. So the building code is there to help prevent radon from entering. The regulations from my office are there to help mitigate the existing radon problem that's in an existing building.
Well, because we run across a lot of people that are buying new construction houses, and they know that they've got the passive system and they're not concerned about it at all. But there still are houses out there that have high radon, even though they're new construction.
Absolutely, there are. And in fact, when it's not done perfectly, meaning the bits and pieces aren't installed with the greatest attention to detail in new construction, we see that some homes are actually much worse than they would have been. You're basically creating a radon collection system under the house that doesn't have a power source to suck the radon out. So it can just gather. And if you're not sealing the gaps and cracks, especially the cold joint in these new homes, good luck winning the radon game. I mean, that's the most imperative thing. If you take nothing else away from this, and new building contractors out there, please caulk the cold joint in your new houses to keep the basement air in the basement and keep the radon from coming in.
What's the cold joint, Josh?
Cold joint, the floor wall joint, where the
okay,
floor meets the concrete block or concrete walls.
Okay. Yep. Got it.
Yeah, as far as radon entry points go, that's probably the biggest one we see on a daily basis. Construction control joints too, whether they're cut or they're preformed. Open sump baskets, which is no longer allowed in building code. And then earth and crawl spaces, which also isn't really allowed by building code anymore either.
What's the best way to deal with a basement bathtub drain?
If you got access to it, foam it. Spray foam it closed. You can always break it out later. Even seen like the 3 foot or 4 foot long extensions for your spray foam cans can reach under a lot of things to foam them closed. If it's just the knockout comes loose. You can always caulk around the knockout, but then obviously when you're going to put some sort of something on it, right? Bathtub or a shower, fill it, make it airtight. However possible, make it airtight.
Okay, cool.
Josh, I'm in the middle of building a cabin right now, and our foundation sits directly on bedrock, and it's a crawl space. There's not a lot of conditioned space down here, with the exception of all the mechanicals and some storage and whatnot. And I'm kind of having a conversation with the contractor about, well, what do we do? And is radon a concern here? We'll get it tested. We'll have a look at it. But what do you say when you're directly on bedrock? Because is that a much different situation? What you said that Canada's got more of this as a concern than we do farther south.
Well, bedrock itself still has all the same components of a lot of the dirt. But what also bedrock has is gaps, cracks, and fissures in it too. That can be connected to Lord knows what. So just because you're on bedrock doesn't really mean a whole lot to me, other than you're going to have a really sturdy structure.
That is true.
But yeah, I wouldn't really handle it. I mean, I would just have your contractor follow the building code. I mean, it's really prescriptive in what to do. Get yourself a soil gas collection mat that's going to at least allow you to capture any radon that might be there and get it vented outside.
Getting back to the licensing thing and specific requirements, if you do have a radon mitigation contractor pulling a tag, basically that's the version of a permit. They're pulling a tag to install one of these mitigation systems. What all is included with that? Does the state come out to inspect the work when it's all done?
We won't get out to inspect every job, but we do get out and inspect every licensed individual on an annual basis. And what we find is that contractors get into a habit. Whatever type of system they install Monday, they'll install it Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And they don't just all of a sudden say, oh, it's Friday, I'm going to do a better job or a worse job. They use the same materials, the same techniques. What you see on Monday again is what you're going to get Thursday. So we're in the midst of inspecting everybody. We've been doing this now for 13 months. When we find issues, we can issue what's called a correction order. Really, right now, it's more of a compliance assistance approach, meaning the end game of any regulation is to get the regulated party in compliance. It's not to hammer them with fines and paperwork and all that extra stuff. It is just to make sure everybody is in compliance and everything installed is in compliance with the minimum codes. So we go out and we make sure that they're in compliance. And if they're not, they'll get an inspection report that says, hey, we found X, Y, and Z wrong. Here's your time frame to go back and fix it. Don't let it happen again. And so you've got contractors that do really, really good work who then may not need to be inspected as often. And then you have the problem child who may actually get visits on site to make sure that they're doing it right. Because to make sure that everything is brought up to a minimum standard of compliance. So yeah, I mean, we're not going to be able to inspect all 4,000 or 6,000 systems that are installed in a year, but we are inspecting every company and every individual that's licensed to do all that work. Those are kind of spot inspections, routine inspections for the professionals. Any sort of requests from homeowners. On that system tag you mentioned, there's a phone number to call for the homeowner. If they see it, they can call and request an inspection. That's free. We'll come out and do that. And then also any complaints that come in. They're private information, but we'll go out and inspect any complaint that comes into. And that could be from a homeowner, a code official, a home inspector, another contractor. You know, if they see the pipe saying venting right by a window, call us up. We'll go out and take the inspection and take the appropriate regulatory actions.
What are some of the most common defects you see, Josh, with installed systems?
Most common defect. I can't give you the most common, but can I give you a top 3 in no particular order?
Yes, please.
Okay. I would say not meeting the proper exhaust points. And there's a whole slew of different illustrations in our standards about where it can be exhaust and where it can't. Active alert notification systems on these not being installed. They need to be installed so the homeowner's aware when the system's no longer functioning, they're alerted to the fact that it's not functioning. The older iterations just simply had a pressure gauge that had a YouTube gauge, right? Mm-hmm. Well, homeowners don't always look at that. Some buyers don't even know it's there. So if the radon fan fails and they're not aware of it, when they go back to sell the house in 5 or 10 years and the radon fan's dead, well, how long has the radon fan been dead? So actually, that's probably one of the biggest ones. Exhaust points, and then also sealing to like gaps and cracks in the floor. It's really important, very important, not only from radon entry standpoint, but more importantly from an energy consumption standpoint. So sealing, alarms, and the exhaust points would be, I think, my top 3 right now. My other inspectors may correct me on some of that. Those are common.
For the alarms, I wasn't even aware of this. I don't know how
Me neither.
but can you just tell me how those alarms work?
Sure.
Have they been required for a year now?
They've been required since June 1st of 2020.
Okay.
But even further back than then, we adopted consensus-based national radon standards in our rules. So we as a state didn't have to go through the rigmarole of coming up with all these different rules. We can point to a consensus process from ANSI that is working through continual maintenance of these standards. And since, I want to say 2015, it's been a requirement for chemical vapor intrusion systems that it has an active alert. Doesn't have to be an audible alarm, but that's the most common. But it could also be some sort of indicator light, like green light, red light, if the power's on. It can also be like a telemetric type of system. For single family homes, it's probably a little much, but if it was a big multi-family building, an email or a text message or some sort of message would be sent electronically to somebody to say, hey, the fan's not on. And so that's been required actually in the standard since 2017 for those that are nationally certified professionals. So fast forward 3 years in 2020, it was a big surprise to a lot of our contractors. We're training on it. We're making people aware that, hey, there's the requirements that are coming. Unfortunately, a lot of the individuals never saw it. And then they get an inspection saying, hey, I didn't put an alarm on it. And then they're surprised.
What is the most common way of having this alarm? What do most people do for this? I mean, how would I know I'm looking at it?
Well, I've got one in a box. I can show you the most common one if I can just go grab it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll take a screenshot of it.
I had no idea that alarms were required.
Yeah,
No
it's news
idea.
to me. No,
I don't
Reuben,
think I've
that's
ever seen
unacceptable. You know everything.
no, I do not. Quite obviously.
All right. Well, here is a common system alarm. It's not the only one on the market. They come in a few other ways, or shapes and sizes, but this particular one has a connection here, a tube connection. And I'll let you get a screenshot of this too, so you can share it on your podcast. But it connects to the radon system almost identical as the YouTube manometer would. But this then is set to the system pressure. So when the system loses pressure, the alarm sounds. It sounds like a smoke detector kind of thing. And it allows the homeowner to be alerted that, hey, the fan's not working, the system's not running properly. And there's also a hush function here too. So it's not going off continuously. But these are required on all radon systems now installed in Minnesota.
Wow. So for anybody who doesn't want to take the time to go in the show notes and look at a picture, he's basically just holding up a little box. It's about the size of a deck of cards, and it is clearly an alarm. It says, what does it say on there? Radon
System alarm.
It says radon system alarm, plain as
Wow.
day. I have not seen one of those in my life.
Me neither.
Well, you were today years old when you learned, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Very interesting.
Hey, when you stump Reuben, you're doing a good day's work.
I smell another blog coming along here.
You know it, Tess. Yeah. What we learned today.
Can I ask a very technical question about new construction? It feels to me like with all the plastic that's supposed to be underneath, like the slabs and that kind of stuff, that a lot of there's like an impenetrable layer that wouldn't allow the radon to actually leak into the house, except for the tube that's going up presumably through the middle of the house. Is that not the case? I mean,
that is not the case. What's spec'd in building code is 6 mil poly. Pretty thick stuff, generally speaking, can withhold a lot of, I should say, relatively speaking, can withhold a lot of puncture resistance. I can't remember the term, but most of the time we pour concrete on top of that 6 mil poly. And I don't know of any cement layers that are levitating and not walking on that. So even though we think it's airtight, it's not. It's got holes in it everywhere, whether by accident or on purpose. I mean, you used to see contractors just popping holes in it because they thought the concrete would cure better. It's also not sealed. It's just laying. So its term in building code is soil gas retarder. I actually make the argument in all my education classes that it doesn't retard any soil gas. It retards the concrete from filling the gravel void below. And that's the important part. The concrete slab building science research will show you the concrete slab is more airtight than the plastic underneath it. As long as with the caveat, as long as that slab is sealed from above.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Josh, now that we've had licensing in effect for, well, it's about 2.5 years now. Is there any interesting data that the state has collected worth sharing with us? Or is it all just kind of, yeah, this is all the stuff we already knew?
We're in the midst of cleaning the data to get it to our data sharing partners at the Environmental Public Health Tracking System. So I don't have anything real fancy and shiny to share with you today, but I would imagine by the end of, say, October, we'll have something. Certainly by the end of the calendar year, that would be newsworthy to share in a press release. We usually try to come up with some sort of like new quote unquote news for our Radon Action Month, which is in January. So I imagine we'll have some sort of nugget in there about what we're seeing for radon data, say from self-reported laboratories versus our professionals, or what percentage of homes and real estate transactions have high radon, that kind of thing. That's the kind of information we can start to suss out here, but we haven't really done that yet.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then how about radon numbers for 2021? Here at Structure Tech, we have seen a dip in the number of radon tests. On average, we're doing about 10% less this year than we did in the past. Saying it used to be like somewhere around 60%. All of our home inspections would get a radon test. Now it's like 50%. We've seen a drop. Has the state seen a drop too, or is that just our business?
Well, it's too early for me to tell you from a testing perspective, because I'm not going to get any real hard 2021 data until roughly the first quarter of 2022.
Oh, okay.
What I can tell you is we had the most successful outreach education program this last winter. Like we had 5 times as many web hits and test kit orders from the general public, probably because we're sequestered at home in the pandemic and people wanting to take care of these things.
It makes sense.
So, yeah, I mean, I actually thought the algorithm was busted because the numbers were just so much higher than they've ever been, which is good news after trying to dig in to see is this all legitimate, and it appears to be. I can say that we've sold almost 5,000 tags already this year through like mid-June. So we're ahead of any pace that we've ever been on as far as mitigation system installations go. How that relates back to the 10% dip machine, I really don't know. Is it time of year? I don't know. I mean, the housing market has just been so crazy that it's so hard to like pinpoint what exactly is triggering some of these things.
I suspect part of it is just that less people are getting home inspections today. We know that because the market is so hot. And I have a feeling that people are saying, all right, I'm going to get the home inspection, but I'm going to skip any of these other things because it's so hot. But that's just me speculating. I really don't know.
Right. Yeah. We're in your shoes too. And we get our data every year. We're like, well, what really happened? What can we go back and look at? We go back and look at home builds and home sales, and we'll go back and look at our quarterly reports from our professionals to see, was there a lot more work? Was there less work? Or was there just like for whatever reason, someone turned off the spigot, in mid-June or early July or something. We'll have to find out.
Sure. And then a follow-up to that is that I've heard a rumor that once you get to outstate Minnesota, you kind of get outside of the metro area, the number of licensed professionals kind of falls off a cliff. And you get into a lot of smaller towns and they don't have licensed radon testing professionals. So for real estate transactions, and, again, this is just what I've heard. I don't have any firsthand experience, but I hear that kind of the standard in all these smaller communities is the seller, they will always perform their own radon test and share that with anybody buying. And everybody just kind of nods and they say, yeah, this is how we do it. Have you heard anything about this?
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing at all.
Very good. That's all right.
It's not to say that it might not be happening, but we do have professionals in what I guess they call greater Minnesota, or not outstate, but greater Minnesota. But no, I haven't heard anything. I haven't gotten any complaints to my knowledge that, hey, we just can't find a professional.
Okay. So, well, that's good to hear.
Well, and if there are areas that are underserved by anybody that's listening, let us know, because we can start trying to recruit professionals. We could come up with some unique ways to at least make the training available to them or point them in the right direction to get licensed. I mean, there's so many different helping hands that we can offer that, we don't want this to be hampered to any home sale. It never should be, for one. And I guess the other talking point I want to get off my chest too is there's never a house that we can't fix.
That's good.
That's a good segue.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to go into this right sizing concept that that you were talking about earlier, you mean this isn't just one size fits all?
It is not by any means. Contrary to what some contractors might tell you, half the systems that they install may be too big. Some of them might be too small, but it takes a real skilled hand and at least a little bit of building science and know-how and experience to do it absolutely perfect. What we don't want to have are systems that are moving too much air, because some of that air that's coming out of the radon pipe is coming from the basement. No matter how much sealing you do, you're going to lose some conditioned air into that radon system. Rule of thumb in our training courses is that we say roughly 50% of the air in a radon system is coming from the house. Okay, well, if your radon system is only moving 30, 40, 50 total CFM, 15, 25 CFM, not a big deal overall. But if it's moving 150 CFM, and now we're going 80 CFM out of the basement continuously, that's a lot of dollars and cents going up that stack. And that's in addition to electrical costs. The more air you move through a radon fan, the more electricity it uses. Now, these fans run somewhere between, on the low end for like a fan for new construction is going to be like 16 to 20 watts. So like $20 a year to operate electricity wise. Middle of the road radon fans that are used probably on 2/3 of radon projects, they're going to be in the 50 to 60 watt range, and they're going to move 30 to 70 CFM. And then on the larger projects or bigger fans can move up to say 150 CFM. So to give you, basically $1 a watt per year to operate these things. But the more air you move, the more air is probably likely coming from the house. And that is a long-term operating cost that we got the calculations that we share with these all the time in our advanced courses. We're not talking dozens of dollars a year. We're talking hundreds of dollars a year times 10 years for the life of that fan. You're talking thousands of dollars in potential energy savings just by installing exactly what's needed, not the max of what you can deliver.
How do you determine what's needed?
Diagnostics, pressure field extension diagnostics. So I'll explain it real crudely. So you've got a rectangle, northeast, southwest are the corners of the house. You put your radon system in the north corner, and you go to the east corner and you drill a 1/2-inch hole through the concrete slab, and you measure the pressure change when the fan is on and when the fan is off. And if you can connect those two dots with the fan running, great. Then you go to, say, the south corner or the west corner, you map the basement. It's a very rudimentary, crude way to explain diagnostics. But what you want to get is a pressure change of just a few pascals in the far reaches of the basement. If you've got a lot more than that, you don't need that much airflow. So you can actually either use a gate valve and cut down the airflow, or some fans have an actual throttle on them. You can turn it down and just turn it down so you get the pressure number in the far reaches that you need. So if you're getting, say, 50 pascals in the far corner, you don't need that much. It's overkill. So let's dial it down to just a little wiggle that you need, and you just saved hundreds or thousands of dollars over the life of this fan. And it takes anywhere between 20 and 60 minutes in additional time to do this. So it's really something that it's near and dear to my heart, and something that I kind of get on my soapbox about because I think it's super important. And let's face it, energy is not going to get any cheaper.
Yeah.
House heat in your home isn't going to get any cheaper.
Well, and I just want to go back. I mean, I'm still digesting what you said, that 50% of the air in those mitigation pipes comes from the house, comes from the basement. Not only is that an energy penalty, just the cost of heating, cooling, going up and out through your house, but just thinking about having basically a suction point that's causing depressurization in the basement. And if someone has like a, combustion appliance that's like a natural draft appliance, like a water heater or an older furnace, then that could cause a system like that to potentially backdraft flue gases into the house, right?
Yep, absolutely. We see it. It's not terribly common because most of these installs are when you have the natural venting appliances, you have makeup air or it's a leaky building. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, we see it happen. On your inspections, I'm certain you see evidence of backdrafting on a lot of water heater.
Yeah, so the radon system can make that worse or make it.
Yeah, and imagine having a house of like 10 people that you're entertaining over Thanksgiving, where you're showering, you're cooking, you're doing laundry, and you have a radon system that's maybe pulling way too much air. Mm-hmm. That house is now under super negative pressure. Mm-hmm. Because you're using not only, it's cold, but you're using all the exhaust fans too.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, yeah, absolutely, can backdraft appliances, and it just makes it even more imperative to get on the soapbox or carbon monoxide detectors too. Like, get them, have them, change the batteries, replace them as needed. It's a must too.
You mean that negativity inside the house has nothing to do with the amount of relatives in the house?
It would increase the amount the house sucks. That's for sure.
Yes.
You know,
I love it.
want to ask you one other kind of technical topic question while we're on this. You and I had chatted about this a while ago, Josh, but it has to do with where you need to terminate that radon pipe, and also why we need to have radon fans installed on the outside of the house.
All right.
That's just something that bugs me a little. I'll leave it up to you to change my mind. Let me throw out my argument real quick. You've got furnace fans. They're taking deadly carbon monoxide and they're pushing that under positive pressure out of the house. And then we've got a terminal that can be within 4 feet of an openable window, exhausting a known hazardous substance, carbon monoxide. And we rely on the fact that you're going to seal the fan, seal all the piping, you glue all the joints, and all of it is going to get out of the house. Yet we take radon gas, which kills people over a long period of time, and we say this is so stinking deadly that we're not even going to let you have the fan inside the house. You need to move the whole fan to the outside so that the whole pipe is under negative pressure. So if there's ever a rupture in the pipe, you're not going to have gases coming out. The air is going to go into the pipe instead. And if there's something that goes wrong with the fan's not going to do any of this. And I feel like we are just way over the top with this. Josh, change my mind.
Well, Bill, there's one in every bunch, right? You mentioned it before.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got a lot of experience in this in the United States. And what we found is a little bit of history background where radon came to fruition really because of a happy or not so happy accident. And that is a family in Pennsylvania. The gentleman's name was Stanley Watrous. Stanley Watrous was an engineer who was working on building the Limerick power plant over in Pennsylvania. He would show up to work and go through the radiation detectors and they would go off. There was no fuel on site. So one day he got so sick of having to go through the decontamination process that he walked through it and then walked out, and he set off both alarms, where normally he would walk in, do his work, and then leave for the day. And when he left, the detector did not go off. What they found was that he had radon decay products all over his clothes from his house. His house was thousands of picocuries. He's in a Reading Prong area in eastern Pennsylvania. It's a known geologic formation with super skyrocket radon. So at that instance, the EPA said, okay, circle the wagons. Let's go in to see how many of these houses have problems, how much radon is in the soil, how much is outside, how much are in these houses. And they found a lot more homes were high than they ever imagined. They kind of thought this might have been a one-off. Clearly is not. So the amount of radon in Stanley's house was sky high. It's comparative to what we see in soil samples throughout the country. So only a small amount of the radon that's in the soil gets into the house, a fraction of it. So if we were always breathing on the soil, we would always be breathing 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 picocuries. It's that concentrated. So two things, when we have a fan in the basement and then that fan shell leaks, or as you mentioned before, a pipe fitting above the fan leaks. Now we've got radon at super high concentrations going into wall cavities or into the basement. And guess what we're not testing for? Radon. So radon can be super high, even though you have a radon system in the house, but it's not properly installed. It can make the radon so much higher. There are plenty of examples from the EPA research that showed when there's actually one story that comes to mind. They had a media blitz where they said, all right, we fixed this house. Come on in, TV cameras. And they go and they vented this one at grade with a fan in the basement. And they went and they pushed the button on the radon monitor. The radon was high because the radon was going outside and then coming right back in. So it's the threat of re-entrainment and the threat of leaking radon through either someone putting a hole in the pipe above the fan or a joint coming loose. Maybe they forgot to glue it. Maybe it came loose. But from a public health perspective, if we have just one house that's too high, that's too many. So we take the belt and suspenders approach. We put the fan outside the conditioned space of the house to limit the amount of radon that might leak from that fan and come back in, and then get the exhaust point up over the roof and propel that straight up and away so that plume doesn't have a chance to re-enter. So that, and coupled with two there is more stuff in the soil than we're aware of. There are stuff in the soil that's more acute, talking like TCEs or methane, gasoline that might be in the soils as far as these chemical vapor sites. The health effects from that can be very quick, especially the fetal effects, instant. So we need to be as protective as we can, and that's why we have fans outside and exhaust points where they are.
That sounds good. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Did I change your mind?
A little. It gives me more background.
Okay.
It's better safe than sorry. It's all
Yeah.
about your tolerance to risk. I probably have a higher tolerance than a lot of other people. And when it comes to the state, I'm sure it's much lower than others. And it helps me understand it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yep.
One thing that strikes me is that there's no standards for like gas ovens or ranges in people's houses. And that just blows my mind because those appliances, burn gas and they have no vent to the exterior. They just vent right into your face, and people are using them every single day.
Or you have the flip side of that, where you've got these wannabe home executive chefs that have a giant tens of thousands of BTU burner stovetop, right? And then you've got the equivalent commercial hood. So when they just want to boil a little pot of water and they turn the vent on, no one ever turns it on low, right? Especially if it's a downdraft. Let's just crank it all up.
Yeah.
Where is that 600 CFM makeup air coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly there's controls now in more modern houses, but not, let's say, that. You think that can induce a radon problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
Radon problem and backdrafting problems.
My question, how often should a homeowner be retesting if they have an active system in their house?
Homeowners should retest every 2 years, and they can do that by themselves. As long as they're comfortable following instructions, you can get a test kit from our partner website, mn.radon.com, for like $11 or $12. You go to your local county health department that often has them for reduced cost or even free, or the hardware store. Big box stores, mom and pop, neighborhood stores may have them too. Just be sure you follow the instructions and you should get a valid result.
Great. Thank you. Now, to put you on the spot, you referenced some great building science minds that you've worked with. Do you mind sharing who these people are? Because the more good building science minds we know, the better off we all are.
Well, I'm an avid fan of Joe Seabrook. I haven't actually worked side by side with him, but I mean, who's not entertained by just reading his articles, right?
That's right.
The radon pioneers are really the ones that I was talking about. Terry Brennan would be one, more close to home. In fact, there's a picture of him behind me with Kevin O'Connor from Ask This Old House. That's Jack Bartholomew, a dear friend of mine and former radon mitigation trainer, late radon mitigation trainer. He taught me everything I know and really kind of like really turned the energy efficiency and right sizing piece in my mind. And what you don't see there too is his obituary from 7 years ago already, this July 6th. But he trained the vast majority of our radon contractors in the upper Midwest, Minnesota, Iowa. If they've been in the game for longer than, say, 7 years, they know who Jack is.
Well, I'm sorry that he's gone, but thank you for sharing. That's good stuff. Well, I think we should put a bow on this one, right? Like we could go on for 3 hours.
Going. I have more questions, but we'll have to have you back, Josh.
We can book part 2 whenever you guys want.
Cool.
There's a trend in that statement that happens on a rather regular basis. When we start talking with somebody, we're like, we have to have you back again because there's just never enough time. And
sure. Hey, I'd be more than happy to do that. And we've got plenty of case studies too to go through, and even the simple ones just to show you guys the importance of right sizing and the energy savings that can come with it. More than happy to do that anytime.
Cool.
That's outstanding.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Josh. We really, really appreciate it. And for any of you who were not familiar with who that is, that's Josh Kerber with the Minnesota Department of Health. He is the technical radon lead, and he knows everything there is to know about radon. So thanks for spending an hour with us and taking on Reuben's question. The doubting Thomas over there, just straight on. So
No problem. I appreciate it, guys. This is a lot of fun. Let's do it again.
Well, you've been listening to Structure Talk, a Structure Tech presentation. My name is Bill Ulrich alongside Tessa Murray and the doubting Thomas, Reuben Saltzman. You are listening to Structure Talk, a Structure Tech presentation. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
For more information on how we can provide you with the right information about your home before you buy or sell, contact us at structuretech.com.